In June 2003, Chelsea's chief executive Trevor Birch set off to meet with Russian businessman Roman Abramovich to discuss the terms of the tycoon's acquisition. Abramovich, accompanied by his entourage, arrived at the meeting modestly attired and maintained an impassive demeanor throughout, a stark contrast from the opulent image that was expected of the billionaire. Birch was skeptical, in part because the club had already held discussions with multiple bidders that didn't break through, but also because no one knew who Roman Abramovich was. Today, it's almost expected for a big club to have a billionaire owner who hides in the shadows. In the early 2000s, however, the idea of a mega-rich foreigner owning a big English club was unheard of. To ease Birch's nerves and assure him of Abramovich's financial validity, a member of his entourage provided a copy of Forbes magazine, in which the billionaire was featured along with details of his wealth. 15 minutes later, Birch and Abramovich had agreed to the outline terms of the acquisition. £140 million would be paid to obtain Chelsea Football Club, £60 million to buy the club, and £80 million to cover its debt. 2 months later, after his first transfer window, Abramovich had spent more than £120 million on new players, with signings including Claude Makelele from Real Madrid, Juan Sebastian Veron from Manchester United, and Hernan Crespo from Inter Milan. To put into context how insane this figure was for the time, the most spent by an English club in a single season was by Manchester United, who had a £77.3 million outlay in the 2001-2002 season. That record-breaking debut transfer window underscores the grandiosity of Abramovich's time as Chelsea owner. But behind this ornate veneer lay the silent truth that was often overlooked, often swept under the rug and ignored so long as the trophies and money kept flowing in. That truth being that Abramovich is an oligarch, and while his oligarchical wealth is what propelled Chelsea to its greatness, it's also what laid the groundwork for its inevitable collapse. To understand how Abramovich was even able to buy Chelsea, we need to understand how the billionaire amassed his fortune. December 1994, a business meeting is held on a Caribbean cruise, where a then young and ambitious, but still moderately successful Abramovich meets Boris Berezovsky, a business and media tycoon who was one of Russia's most politically prominent oligarchs at the time. Impressed by Abramovich, Berezovsky introduced him to the family, the close circle of then-President Boris Yeltsin, which included his daughter Tatiana, his chief of staff Alexander Voloshin, his chief security advisor Alexander Korsakov, and his future son-in-law Valentin Yumashev. During the months that followed this meeting, Abramovich and Berezovsky had become close business partners. The two fostered an entrepreneurial relationship that culminated in the birth of Sibneft, an oil company that was created after Berezovsky convinced President Yeltsin to merge a crude oil producer with a refinery that him and Abramovich would have control over. In exchange for the oil company, Berezovsky agreed to finance pro-Yeltsin propaganda on ORT, Russia's most prominent TV channel, to craft a more favorable perception of the controversial president among the Russian populace. After the arrangement was agreed upon, Yeltsin established Sibneft by decree in August 1995. He sold the oil company to Abramovich through a series of rigged auctions for the remarkably low price of £190 million. Approximately £170 million of Abramovich's bidding money was bankrolled by the Russian government, with the oligarch himself only paying a fraction of the fee. This fixed deal in the 1990s was the first major step Abramovich took towards building his fortune, and by the time he bought Chelsea in 2003, Forbes had estimated that the Russian's net worth was around £4.5 billion. July 2003. Abramovich's next move was a stark departure from his usual politicking and oil money affairs. On the first of the month, just days after his infamous 15-minute meeting with Trevor Birch, Abramovich had met with Chelsea's then chairman, Ken Bates, at the Dorchester Hotel in London to sign the documents that would grant him ownership of Chelsea Football Club. In an interview with the BBC released 3 days after the acquisition, Abramovich was asked whether the buyout was solely about making money, to which he responded, "No, it's not about making money, it's about having fun, and that means success and trophies." Looking back at his tenure at Chelsea, the statement holds truth. Although his financial investment in the club did pay off, with its value skyrocketing from the £140 million he paid for its acquisition to the £2.5 billion it was sold for in 2022. This increase was only possible due to the transformation the club underwent under Abramovich's leadership. During his time as owner, Chelsea went on to win 5 Premier League titles, 5 FA Cups, 3 League Cups, 2 Europa League titles, and 2 Champions League titles, among other trophies. During this time as owner, Abramovich spent a staggering £2 billion to maintain the club's prominence, with transfer fees and player salaries making up the majority of the outlay. While it's commonplace for big clubs to be backed by mega-rich owners who inject billions into them today, it was Abramovich's unconventional acquisition of Chelsea in 2003 that sparked the commercial shift within football spending and ownership. For better or for worse, Abramovich not only revolutionized Chelsea with his purchase of the club, but he also reshaped the football industry at large. November 2021. 6 months after another significant win with Chelsea at the Champions League, Abramovich hosted an afternoon tea party for the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog. Approximately 50 individuals, including Chelsea director Eugene Tenenbaum, attended the event, where Abramovich was lauded with congratulatory speeches throughout. While it may seem strange to imagine a Russian oligarch mingling with world leaders, such occurrences were rather common not so long ago. In fact, Abramovich's ability to reside and conduct business in the UK stemmed from the infamous Golden Visa scheme implemented by the British government in the 1990s. This scheme permitted affluent foreigners to reside and work in the UK under the condition that they pledged to invest substantial sums into the British economy. Of course, the British government was aware that a significant portion of the funds entering the country through the Golden Visa scheme, especially money that came from Russian oligarchs, had shady origins. But at the time, geopolitical relations between Russia and the larger Western world were considerably less turbulent than they are now, which mitigated concerns and even care. Even today, when we examine foreign investments into the British economy, a substantial portion comprises of individuals, companies, and entire states whose ethical standing is questionable at best. This, of course, includes investments in ownership within the realm of football. But much like today's oil state-funded clubs, fans and the government alike ignored the dubious nature of Abramovich's wealth during his tenure. His capacity to bring trophies, popularity, and money into the club overshadowed any concerns regarding the origins of his fortune and his questionable political ties. But of course, it was only months after that tea party in November that the lights finally came on and the truth began to take surface.
We are following breaking news tonight. The Russian president says a military operation is now underway in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine's foreign minister calls it a full-scale invasion.
February 2022. With Russia officially declaring war on Ukraine, it was only a matter of time before the spotlight turned towards the oligarch class. Abramovich, arguably the most renowned oligarch, found himself under intense scrutiny. Alongside 7 other oligarchs residing in the UK, the British government imposed sanctions on Abramovich due to his close association with the Kremlin, more specifically Vladimir Putin. To grasp the origins of Abramovich's ties to Putin, we have to go back to the 1990s, when the magnate made his first billions. While Abramovich's fortune blossomed under Boris Yeltsin's presidency, it was Vladimir Putin's ascent to power that truly catalyzed the oligarch's wealth. During the late 1990s, when Abramovich was successfully initiated into Yeltsin's family, he was also cultivating a relationship with Vladimir Putin, who even back then was a prominent figure in Russian politics. Recognizing Putin's potential, Abramovich aligned himself with the future president to fortify his position within the Kremlin's corridors of power. During his presidential campaign, one of Putin's major electoral pledges was to limit the political and economic power of the oligarchs. He made this pledge partly as lip service, as the oligarchs were largely hated by the common people whose state-owned assets had been privatized by them, but also because he sought to augment his own influence over the oligarchs, harnessing their wealth for his own political gain. Once he did ascend to power, Putin didn't actually put an end to the oligarch class. Rather, he targeted individual oligarchs who opposed his presidency and didn't bend to his authority. One of these oligarchs included Abramovich's longtime partner, Boris Berezovsky, who initially supported Putin, but later became a staunch opponent, which eventually led to his exile from Russia. Putin destabilized the power and influence of most oligarchs from the Yeltsin era, yet Abramovich stood as one of the few who retained prominence under Putin's rule, largely due to his proven loyalty to the president. He played a crucial role in facilitating Putin's ascent to the presidency by leveraging his close ties to Yeltsin to advocate for Putin as his successor. Moreover, Abramovich continued to collaborate with Putin and his government in the years that followed his ascension. September 2005. Abramovich sold the oil company he'd founded during the Yeltsin era to Putin's Kremlin for £7.4 billion. The transaction was mutually beneficial. With Sibneft under his control, Putin gained greater sway over Russia's oil and gas industry, while Abramovich more than doubled his net worth to £10.3 billion in 2005. From helping him bid for the Russia World Cup in 2010 to more sketchy allegations of secret business deals between the two, it appeared that they remained in close contact. This eventually caught up with Abramovich in the public eye following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. March 2nd, 2022, the billionaire announced he would be selling the club in a statement made on the Chelsea website, released after days of media backlash and political pressure from the British government to sanction him. In his statement, Abramovich asserted that he was selling the club as it was in its best interest to do so, and expressed his final wish to visit Stamford Bridge one last time to bid farewell to the fans. This wish would never come true, as just 8 days later, Abramovich was hit with the aforementioned sanctions by the British government, making this his final address to Chelsea fans and final statements as Chelsea owner. Just 2 months later, on May 7th, 2022, Chelsea announced that a consortium led by Ted Bowley and Clearlake Capital had purchased the club for a reported £2.5 billion, with an additional £1.7 billion pledged to be invested into the club by its new owners. Although the club burgeoned into a multi-billion-pound empire under Abramovich's stewardship, the oligarch didn't receive any of the profits from its sale due to the sanctions imposed on him by the British government. In an interview with Forbes just a year before he was forced to sell Chelsea, he stated that, in hindsight, he would have reconsidered buying the club given the media attention it attracted, a sentiment echoed by his lawyer a year later during the sanctioning process, who contended that Abramovich was being targeted primarily because of his ownership of Chelsea Football Club and public profile. Not only did he lose control of the club, but since his departure, Chelsea's faced disaster after disaster under Bowley's administration, from bad spending habits to questionable transfers, and even reports of debts and dealings from the Abramovich era coming back to haunt them. The wealth and power that enabled the rise of Abramovich's Chelsea became the catalyst, not just for Abramovich's loss of ownership, but for the club's decay into its worst state in recent history.